Dear cynics and romantics, my name is Monice, and you are listening to the Romantic Cynic podcast. On this episode, I wanted to talk about knowing your self worth. Sometimes this can be difficult for some people, be it if you are single or if you're in a relationship. Because the reality is, sometimes our own self worth, we believe, is determined by people that are in our lives. So I hope you join me on today's episode, where we might mix in some laughter, maybe some tears, romance, and of course, some cynicism. Welcome to episode 35. What is self-worth? According to the American Psychological Association, your self-worth is your evaluation of yourself as a capable and valuable human being deserving of consideration and respect. It is an internal sense of being worthy of love. Now, if we think about the three words they use, respect, love, and consideration, especially in regards to our relationships with others, such as our friends, family, neighbors, spouse, life partner, we tend to internalize a lot of how they treat us, and we allow that to determine what our self-worth is. I know for me personally, from previous relationships, I had used or have thought the way they treated me, my previous relationships, the way my partners had treated me, I felt as if that was my worth. Like my own self-worth was determined by how they treated me. And in a sense, yes, it is something that we see as a fact of, they treat me poorly, so therefore I must be worthy of being treated poorly. They treat me kindly, so therefore I deserve or I am worthy of being treated kindly. So we do take a lot of how people treat us, and we internalize that, and we believe that that is how we are worthy of whatever that may look like to you. Now, it's far more meaningful or detrimental when it comes to someone that we are romantically involved with, or if it's from our close friends or who we consider to be our close friends, or it's family. The way those three groups of people typically will tell us internally, we internalize that of, hey, this is how they treat me, so therefore this is what I'm worthy of. But we also have to really think about it from an individual standpoint. All of us are worthy of respect. We are all worthy of love, and we are all worthy of consideration. I know from all my episodes, I always have examples of any topic at hand. And of course, the one I always bring up is my marriage, because that was a 14-year relationship, and that was a lot of history and a lot of who I was in my 20s and into my early 30s. A topic I don't talk a lot about, and I haven't covered because it's such a sensitive subject, is abuse. Now, abuse in a relationship, and that could be psychological, emotional, physical, sexual, any type of abuse, really will determine how we feel as a person, especially if it's, if we're on the receiving end. And especially when you are in a relationship for a very long time, you really believe or begin to believe that the way that person is treating you is what you're worthy of. Even if you are a hard worker, you develop relationships outside, of your relationship. So when I talk about relationships, I talk about like friendships, maybe colleagues. You can be the sweetest person that anyone could ever meet. and you are so considerate and so respectful, and everything you do for those people is with kindness. But when you go home at the end of the night and you are abused, no matter what form that looks like, because that person is so close to you, because you see them every day and you live with them, and the way they treat you, you internalize that and you believe that you are unworthy. And that is not true. The way you treat others and how it's reciprocated. Now, I'm not including romantic relationships that are toxic and extremely volatile, but the way you treat other people and how you're reciprocated by those other people's, especially if you're a kind person, then they're giving kindness back. That's your worth. That is who you are as a person. And unfortunately, we put so much weight on those really close personal relationships. And I know I can say that as partly true from my own experience, unfortunately. And luckily for me, I was able to get out of my marriage. I was able to get out of my first real relationship because the way they treated me was poorly. And the thing is, when you're treated that way, you do kind of get to a point where you give back what you're giving. You give back what you're getting from the person. And sometimes it can create a very ugly version of who you are. And that is not someone that you like kindly. You internalize that again, as well as how you treat your significant other, especially if you're being treated really poorly. But going back to self-worth, like the way you're being treated by your significant other, again, it's something that we internalize and we feel. For those of you that have experienced that, you believe all of a sudden you are so unworthy of love. You are so unworthy of respect, and you're so unworthy of consideration. And it's only because the way your partner or significant other is treating you. Now, there are a few things that we can do as an individual, especially if it's not an awful relationship, and there's some relationships that do need work. But there's some things that you can start doing for yourself that will help you know and realize your own self-worth. So one of them is always seeing yourself as an equal to your partner. If you're treated, and I guess the best way you can kind of, think of it from this perspective is, you two are walking down the street. Now, are you walking side by side or are you walking behind? And they kind of walk ahead of you because they don't care. I mean, they really are telling you where they believe you are in the relationship. They're showing you exactly the hierarchy of the relationship. If you're walking side by side as equals and you see yourself as an equal, that energy should be able to reflect back that your partner believes that you are an equal. Now, not everything that I'm going to be kind of covering is the end all be all. This is how you fix things. I'm not here to try to fix relationships. I'm here to just inform you and just help you become a little bit more educated to see what your relationship is really based on and to see who you truly are as a person and know your self-worth. I know from my own experiences with my ex-husband, he would walk ahead of me sometimes to show me, that he didn't care. It was one of those, like, it just didn't care, but it was always consistent. I finally got to a point where I would walk ahead because I just got sick of what that looked like to an outside perspective. I don't want people to think that I'm following him like as if I'm a dog or as if I'm bound to him in a negative way. I like being able to walk side by side with my partner because that tells me if you're able to walk beside your partner at an equal level, the way you work together will be on equal footing because you're equals. You will come together as a team when you're facing some issues, and that is far more telling than some of the other things that they may do for you to make you feel an iota of importance in their life. And again, I'm talking more of relationships that are just toxic or not the healthiest relationships. So being able to always see yourself as an equal to your partner is critically important to help you figure out or to help you recognize your own self-worth. Another one is recognize what you bring to the relationship. So what do you feel that you bring in a positive way to the relationship? Are you respectful to them, and are they respectful to you? If they're having a bad day, are you loving and patient with them to kind of set aside whatever you're dealing with just to kind of focus on them? And are they reciprocating that? Or do they make you feel the same way? Like you're having a bad day and they recognize that. So they're bringing to you some love and comfort and all the positives. Like write down if you need help, like write down what you positively bring into the relationship, or better yet, ask your partner. What positive things do I bring to the relationship? And that's going to really help you figure out your own self-worth. Now, there are people in relationships now that have been in toxic relationships before, or unhealthy relationships, or even abusive relationships before, and they have somewhat low self-esteem about themselves, but they might be in a very healthy relationship, and you have a partner that is exceedingly patient, exceedingly loving, that can help guide you with that. Now, one thing I do want to say is we can't rely solely on an outside external force to make us recognize our self-worth. We have to internalize, and we ourselves have to self-recognize what our self-worth is. Because even though someone could say it to you 100 times in 100 different ways in 100 days, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to internalize that and recognize that as yourself. Everyone is worthy of love, consideration, and respect. I want to go back to those three because I think it's really important that we do that. And I know sometimes we might be considerate of other people, or we might be considerate of our partner, but our partner isn't considerate of us. And unfortunately, it's not because you're not worthy, it's because they're just a selfish human being, unfortunately. Another thing that we can work on is working on your own low self-esteem issues. Now, what self-esteem issues could you particularly have? Some people think they might not be smart enough. There's different levels of intelligence. Some people, at least in my former relationship, I was always criticized for not being street smart, but I was praised, quote unquote, for being book smart because I went to school and I like to read books and I like to learn things. Like I'm kind of a book nerd in that regard. But for my partner to tell me, my ex-husband to tell me that I have zero street smarts was really harsh for me to hear. And so I kind of had low self-esteem issues thinking that I wasn't street smart. But the thing is, even though he kept continually telling me that over and over, there's a part of my internal that said, no, that's not true, because I've experienced things in my past that I had to be street smart. I had to recognize how people treated me, and I had to recognize certain situations to avoid certain outcomes of negative situations. And so I had to somewhat work on that, or I had to ignore. That's kind of, it's easier said than done. It's sometimes it's hard to ignore what someone repeatedly tells you, because the more they tell you repeatedly day after day, you end up unfortunately start believing it, even if it's not true. So working on some of your low self-esteem issues is going to be really helpful for you to figure out your self-worth. Talking to someone sometimes will help you realize that you probably shouldn't have self-esteem issues. For example, pick something that you feel that you have low self-esteem on and really try to find a positive thing that you can say about yourself on that particular thing. So, for example, my example was street smart. What have you experienced in your past that you can say, hey, in that moment, I was street smart? Again, this is just an example. It could be anything that you personally feel like you have low self-esteem on. It can be your appearance, it could be your job, it can be your friends. How you treat people will help. If you recognize you're a good person and you recognize that you treat people fairly and kindly, that will help with some of your self-esteem, at least boost it for a time being. And the thing is, you have to be really mindful and work on it every day. Maybe you're not good at taking compliments because maybe you think you are unworthy of a compliment. Instead of saying, oh, that's not true, just say thank you and be humble and be kind and be grateful. Little things like that will help boost your self-esteem. Every single one of us is worthy of consideration, respect, and love, but as long as we do it in a healthy manner. I know a lot of the times on my podcast, and I mentioned this earlier, where being in a relationship, a toxic relationship, or being in a relationship that you are just miserable and unhappy, and sometimes walking away is a lot easier. And that's what I kind of preach on a lot of my podcast episodes, because finding your own self-worth, recognizing your own self-worth, knowing that you are worthy of consideration, respect, and love. And if you're not getting those three in a relationship, then what's the point of being in a relationship? I'm a big believer that I would much rather, and this is what I learned in my marriage, my previous relationship, I would rather be alone to create my own self-misery versus being in a relationship where my partner is creating my self-misery. They are creating my misery because I can't blame myself for being in a relationship that is so toxic and so unhealthy. And yes, some people will say, well, it's easier to step out of a relationship. It's easier because it takes a lot of hard work to work in a relationship, and that might be true. But at the end of the day, finding your own self-worth, knowing who you are, loving who you are, understanding that I deserve and you deserve to be in a relationship that with a partner that gives you consideration, respect, and love. Now, you also have to give your partner consideration, respect, and love. As long as as long as you both are putting in 100% of yourself and working towards having a really great, healthy relationship, you are worthy of all three of those things. And accepting anything less that is really a tragedy in your life, because you're going to miss out on a really wonderful relationship with yourself. You're going to miss out on a really wonderful relationship with a partner that is out there waiting for you. So I hope this topic of self-love gave you some insight today and gives you some food for thought and makes you really dig deep in understanding what you are deserving in your relationship. So I found this quote, and I want to end my podcast on a quote. And so I found this one, and it is written by Nikki Banis, and it says, self-worth. The only one who gets to decide your worth is you. It doesn't come from your bank account or the number of friends you have. It doesn't come from what someone else says you are worth. It's called self-worth for a reason. It comes from you. It comes from being yourself and being proud of who you are. It comes from being someone that you can count on and someone you love. The numbers will change with time, but what won't change is who you are deep inside. Beautiful, limitless, wonderful, creative, strong, capable. And that is where your worth comes from. Thank you for listening, and as always, yours truly, the Romantic Cynic.